The mountains of Rwanda slept under a blanket of fog, thick enough to feel like breath, slow, heavy, alive. Night clung to every ridge like a shadow unwilling to leave. At this altitude, silence wasn't simply the absence of sound. It was a presence of its own, watchful, ancient, waiting. Dr. Arun Keller had learned to respect that silence. In 7 years atop these mountains, he'd grown accustomed to the nocturnal rhythms, branches shifting under wind, the distant crack of bamboo stalks, the soft movement of troops settling into sleep. But tonight, something broke that rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. 3 sharp blows, not frantic, not random, deliberate. Arun sat up instantly, heart thumping against his ribs. He listened. Thud. A single, heavier strike vibrated through the metal gate. He grabbed his flashlight, slipped into his boots, and crossed the corridor with steps careful enough not to provoke whatever waited outside. The cold air rushed in through the cracks, smelling of wet stone and drifting fog. When he unlatched the gate and opened it a few inches, his breath hitched in his throat. A young mountain gorilla stood barely a meter away, soaked, mud-streaked, trembling so violently his arms shook with each breath. Fog curled around his silhouette, making him look like a ghost torn from the forest. Arun raised the flashlight slightly. That was when he saw the eyes. They were wide, reflecting fear so intense it bordered on agony. But underneath the fear, beneath the panic, was something infinitely rarer. Trust. Not curiosity, not confusion, but trust. The young gorilla extended his arm toward Arun, slowly at first, then with sudden desperation, grabbing the sleeve of Arun's jacket and tugging hard. A clear, unmistakable gesture. Come, follow me, now! Arun stood frozen. His mind tried to apply logic, instinct, protocol, but none of them fit. Gorillas didn't come to humans for help. They didn't approach research stations in the dead of night. They didn't use gestures with this level of precision. Yet here he was, trembling, pleading, pulling. The gorilla released a short, broken whimper. A sound Arun had never heard from a gorilla his age. Not a threat, not a scream, a cry for help. Arun shifted the flashlight downward and saw the mud smeared across the young gorilla's legs. Fresh, still wet. But what truly made his chest tighten were the darker streaks mixed into the mud, stains that didn't look like dirt. He crouched slightly. "What happened to you?" he murmured. The gorilla took a step back into the fog, then forward again, tugging for the 3rd time, harder than before. Whatever this was, it was urgent, desperate, unnatural. Against every rule he'd been taught, Arun stepped outside the gate, and the gorilla moved instantly, turning and disappearing into the fog with a soft rustle of bamboo. Arun hesitated only long enough to grab his bag and lock the gate behind him. Then he stepped fully into the mist. The night closed around him like a living thing. Ahead, the faint outline of the young gorilla appeared again, waiting. Arun swallowed hard. Whatever lay down that mountain path, whatever had driven a wild gorilla to seek a human in the night, it wasn't just danger. It was something that could change everything. The forest swallowed sound as Arun followed the young gorilla away from the station. The metal gate closed behind him with a soft, final click, one that felt less like a door shutting and more like a line being crossed. In front of him, the fog rolled downhill in slow, heavy sheets, blurring the world into shifting shades of gray and green. The gorilla moved ahead with surprising certainty. He didn't run wildly. He didn't stumble. He chose his steps carefully, pausing every few meters to check if Arun was following. Each time their eyes met through the fog, the same message pulsed in that gaze. Don't stop, we're not done. Arun tightened the straps of his field bag and adjusted the flashlight beam, though it hardly mattered. The fog devoured the light, bouncing it back in hazy halos that barely reached the nearest bamboo trunks. He'd spent 9 years observing gorillas in these mountains. He knew troop hierarchies, feeding habits, vocal patterns, family bonds. He'd watched births, fights, reconciliations. He'd seen fear, he'd seen aggression, but he had never seen this. A young gorilla, alone at night, knocking on a human's gate, begging for him to follow. The thought tightened his chest. At first, the path was familiar, a narrow trail cut into the slope, lined with thick bamboo and dense undergrowth. He'd walked it dozens of times in daylight, with a team properly equipped. But tonight, everything felt different. Branches had been snapped recently, leaves lay crushed into the mud, as if large bodies had rushed through. The soil bore drag marks, heavy, uneven, chaotic. Something had run through here in panic. Not one animal, many. The young gorilla slowed at a bend, then glanced back over his shoulder, issuing a low, anxious grunt. "I'm here," Arun whispered, almost to himself. "I'm not going anywhere." He continued forward, and then the scent hit him. Sharp, acrid, synthetic. It slithered into his senses like smoke, scratching at the back of his throat, stinging his nose. It didn't belong to fog or soil or bamboo. It belonged to something manufactured, something poured or sprayed where it shouldn't be. Chemicals. Arun's stomach sank. He bent down and touched the ground. The mud was darker in patches, clumped unnaturally. A few leaves were discolored, their edges curled and brittle despite the wet air. Beside them, he spotted something half-buried, a chunk of cassava root, pale and starchy. He lifted it closer to his face, inhaled cautiously. The sting intensified. It wasn't fertilizer, it wasn't ordinary farm runoff. It was something designed to keep animals away, or punish them for getting too close. The young gorilla emitted a choked whimper and tapped Arun's arm, almost as if begging him not to linger. He turned and moved again, faster this time. The trail steepened as they descended toward the ravine. The forest changed. The bamboo grew taller, thicker, forming a looming tunnel overhead. The fog clung closer, dampening the world into muffled echoes. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried once, then fell abrupt into silence. Arun's boots slid on the slick ground. He grabbed branches to steady himself, feeling the cold bark bite into his palms. He knew where they were heading now. Sinkstone Pass. A narrow, unstable corridor carved into the mountain, known by rangers and trackers mostly through warnings. Dangerous, unpredictable, prone to sudden landslides and hidden fissures. It was the kind of place where one wrong step didn't just injure you, it erased you. The young gorilla hesitated at the top of the descent, glancing at Arun with a mixture of fear and determination, then started down the treacherous path without waiting for approval. "You really want me here," Arun murmured, more to himself than to the animal. "You chose me." The realization hit him harder than he expected. The gorilla could have run anywhere, hid, stayed with the troop. Instead, he'd climbed in the darkness, fought through the fog, and knocked on a metal door he'd been taught to fear, because something or someone down there mattered more than his fear. Arun followed. The air grew colder. The smell of chemicals thickened. The forest seemed to lean in closer, as if trying to warn him or bear witness. And then, without even seeing it yet, Arun understood the unspoken truth. Whatever waited below wasn't an accident of nature. It was the result of a decision, a human decision. Before we go deeper into the mountain, tell me in the comments, from which country and city are you watching this story? I'd love to know where this journey is reaching around the world. And as we go on, imagine you're walking there with Arun. What would you do? The descent into Sinkstone Pass felt less like walking and more like sliding into another world. Fog curled around Arun's legs in thick swirls, hiding the uneven ground. The bamboo closed in above him, their tall, thin trunks creaking softly as the wind slipped through. Every sound seemed distant and swallowed, as if the forest itself were listening instead of speaking. The young gorilla moved ahead, close enough to follow, far enough to force Aaron to commit. He wasn't just walking paths, he knew. He was choosing them. At times, he veered off the main track to skirt around patches of unstable soil. At others, he paused, sniffed the air, then adjusted direction as if avoiding something invisible to human senses. Aaron realized with a strange mix of awe and dread that he wasn't guiding this rescue. He was being guided. The ground grew slicker as they descended further. Moss clung to rocks, almost glowing in the dim light. Water trickled from cracks in the stone, joining small rivulets that ran alongside the path, turning dirt into slick, treacherous mud. Arun's foot hit a hidden patch of it. He slipped. His legs flew out from under him, and his body lurched sideways toward the edge of the narrow trail. The world tilted, the ravine yawning below like a dark mouth, waiting. His hand flailed for a hold and met nothing but wet air. For a split second, he felt his weight give way. Then something caught him. A small, wiry hand gripped a fistful of his jacket, just under the shoulder, yanking with a strength that far exceeded its size. Aaron's body swung back toward the trail, crashing into the muddy slope instead of the empty air. He gasped, his chest colliding with the ground, lungs burning. The young gorilla dug his heels into the mud, muscles straining, eyes wide with terror. He let out a guttural, panicked grunt, as if scolding him and begging him not to fall in the same breath. Aaron coughed, pushed himself up to his knees, and stared at the ravine below. It was deeper than it had looked, a jagged moor lined with jagged rock and loose stone. A fall there wouldn't mean injury, it would mean disappearance. He swallowed hard, his pulse racing. "Thank you," he whispered, breathless. The gorilla's chest heaved. He leaned in, gently touching Aaron's arm with his fingertips, a fleeting, almost human gesture of reassurance. Then he turned and moved again. No time for relief, no time for gratitude. Whoever he'd come to save was still out there, somewhere ahead. And their time was running out. They pressed on. The path narrowed further, forcing Aaron to walk single file with the ravine at his side, close enough that a misplaced step would mean a slip into darkness. The fog pooled thicker here, hugging the ground instead of drifting. That was when Arun noticed something else: footprints. At first, they were subtle, a disturbed patch of mud here, a broken twig there. But deeper into the pass, they became undeniable. Gorilla tracks, many of them, overlapping, crossing. Unlike the usual ordered movement of a troop, these were scattered, some deep and heavy, some lighter, some sliding, signs of panic, of running, of stumbling under stress. Mixed among them were other impressions, boot prints, not from lightweight trekking shoes, but heavy soles with defined patterns, human, recent, and many. Aaron's jaw clenched. This wasn't just animals wandering too far. This was contact. The chemical stench grew stronger the further they went, digging into his sinuses, riding the back of every breath. Some bamboo stalks showed unnatural burns along their lower halves, as if splashed with something acidic. A few leaves were curled and blackened along the edges. The young gorilla hesitated near one such patch, sniffed the air, and recoiled with a pitiful whimper. He skirted around it, making a wider arc than necessary, never letting his skin brush the stained foliage. He knew. He'd learned the hard way what that smell meant. The ground evened out just enough for Arun to feel a momentary sense of relief. It didn't last. Ahead, the trail narrowed into a stone bridge, a natural arch of rock spanning a deep fracture in the earth. Fog poured through the crack below like slow-moving smoke, hiding its true depth. The bridge was no wider than two boots placed side by side. The young gorilla crossed first, light and careful, barely disturbing small pebbles near the edge. Aaron followed, forcing each step to stay centered. Halfway across, he heard it. Crack! A sharp, splintering sound echoed under his boot. The stones sagged fractionally, a hairline fissure racing from beneath his foot toward the far edge of the bridge. His heart slammed into his throat. He didn't think. He jumped. His foot hit the far side just as a thin sliver of rock sheared away behind him, tumbling soundlessly into the fog below. The bridge held, but barely. The young gorilla grabbed his wrist the second he landed and yanked him forward away from the fracture. For a moment, Aaron just stood there, panting, listening to the echo of his own heartbeat in his ears. If he'd hesitated for even 1 second, the gorilla released his wrist and stared up at him with an expression Aaron could only interpret as, "Don't stop now." They moved on, and with every step one thought grew louder in Arun's mind. If the path to whoever needed help was this dangerous, what kind of nightmare waited at the end? The fog thinned as the trail opened into a circular clearing, a natural bowl carved by time and rain, ringed by massive stones draped in moss. Dew clung to everything, turning the ground into a glistening sheet of wet earth. A faint breeze stirred the bamboo at the edges, but the center of the clearing was still, unnaturally still. The young gorilla stopped so abruptly that Aaron nearly collided with him. He didn't look back this time. He didn't tug Aaron's sleeve. He simply lifted a trembling arm and pointed. Arun followed the gesture, and everything inside him dropped. There, half collapsed beside a fallen cluster of bamboo, lay a massive silverback. Not just any silverback, Gahiji, the guardian of the mountain, leader of one of the most stable troops in the region. A giant whose presence alone kept predators and rival males at bay. And now he was sprawled on the ground, chest heaving in uneven, fractured breaths. His fingers twitched weakly against the mud. His silver streak, usually bright under sunlight, was dull and caked with dirt. Arun felt his pulse spike. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't injury. This was something far worse. Gahiji tried to shift, lifting his head a few inches, only for it to fall heavily back to the ground. A deep, broken growl trembled from his throat, a sound so raw and primal that it cut through the air like a warning siren. Instinct froze Aaron in place. Even dying, Gahiji radiated a presence that demanded respect. Every muscle in his enormous frame seemed coiled with the last remnants of authority. But then the growl cracked, and in its place came a pained, helpless rasp that didn't sound like a king of the forest. It sounded like someone begging not to be left alone. The young gorilla rushed to his side, letting out a high, panicked cry. He touched Gahiji's shoulder, then his cheek, then pressed his head against the silverback's chest in a heartbreaking attempt to comfort him. Aaron forced himself forward, kneeling close enough to see details he wished he couldn't. Foam crusted at the edges of Gahiji's lips. His abdomen spasmed with involuntary tremors. A thin line of vomit streaked the mud beside him. Poisoning, severe. Aaron's gut twisted. He scanned the ground and saw the pieces, literally. Chunks of cassava root lay scattered around Gahiji's body. Chewed, half digested, stained with a bluish residue along the edges. Aaron picked one up, lifted it to his nose, and inhaled gently. The chemical sting hit immediately, burning the inside of his nostrils. Not natural toxin, not contaminated water. This was deliberate, a type of pesticide illegally used in lowland plantations. Dangerous, cheap, deadly. Farmers who wanted gorillas far from their crops often soaked cassava in it and left it where troops might test the food. And Gahiji, as silverbacks often did, would have eaten first to ensure it was safe for the younger ones. Arun's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't nature. This was a human decision. The young gorilla tugged at Arun's sleeve, frantic. His eyes glistened with fear, shimmering in the dim light. He tapped Gahiji's chest twice, a sharp, urgent rhythm. Save him. Arun swallowed. I'm going to try, he whispered. He took a cautious step forward. Gahiji's eyes snapped open. A guttural roar tore through the clearing, weak but fierce. His arm swung upward in a slow, staggering arc, more reflex than attack. Arun froze. The young gorilla immediately threw himself against Gahiji's chest, letting out a string of urgent, pleading cries. His small hands pressed against the silverback's fur, trying to hold him down, not in dominance, but in reassurance. A command, a plea, a bridge between two worlds. Gahiji's arm trembled, his lips peeled back weakly, but the attack never came. Instead, his massive body sagged back into the mud, exhausted. His gaze slid to Arun again, still sharp, still dangerous, but laced with something else now. Recognition, confusion, fear, and, beneath it all, a flicker of trust too faint to be certain. Arun moved closer slowly, knees sinking into the cold mud. His fingers reached toward his pack because there was no time, no margin, left to hesitate. The young gorilla watched him with terrified hope. Gahiji watched him with a dying king's pride and vulnerability. Arun opened the pack. The clearing held its breath. Time seemed to stretch around the clearing, thick as the fog that clung to the stones. Arun's fingers moved through his field bag with a trembling urgency. He had no luxury of precision, only instinct and desperation guiding him now. Activated charcoal, rehydration salts, a small vial of broad-spectrum antidote not designed for gorillas, but better than doing nothing. He had treated poisoned antelope, monkeys, even a leopard once, but never a silverback. Never a creature whose sheer power could end his life with a single confused swipe. Behind him, the young gorilla hovered anxiously. His hands fluttered, unsure whether to help Arun or comfort Gahiji. He pressed his forehead against the silverback's chest again, releasing a low, repetitive whimper, like a heartbeat spoken in grief. Arun mixed the antidote in a collapsible cup, charcoal turning the liquid thick and black. The smell was sharp and earthy. His hand trembled as he stirred. He whispered to himself, "Come on, come on, stay with me." When the mixture was ready, he turned toward Gahiji. The silverback's breaths were ragged, dusting the ground with faint tremors. His eyes opened to slits, dark, clouded, but still holding the spark of a leader who refused to fall quietly. Arun approached, but Gahiji's instincts flared faster than his failing body. With a violent jolt of muscle, the silverback surged upward. His arms swung in a slow but terrifying arc, more reflex than attack, but powerful enough to shatter bone. Arun recoiled, too slow, but the young gorilla leaped between them with a cry so raw it cracked through the fog like lightning. He pressed both palms into Gahiji's chest, shaking, whimpering, pleading. A primal conversation flowed between them without a single word. Trust him. Don't fight. Let him help. Gahiji's arm trembled, caught halfway through the motion. His lips pulled back in a weak snarl, then softened, only slightly, but enough. His massive chest sagged back toward the earth. His breathing hitched, his head lowered. He wasn't giving up, he was surrendering control. Arun exhaled shakily. He edged closer, sliding on his knees through the mud until he was within an arm's length of the dying giant. His heart hammered so loud he feared Gahiji might sense it as a threat. He extended a single hand, not toward the antidote, not toward the face, but toward the ground. Palm open, fingers relaxed, a gesture of non-dominance, respect, and something deeper than fear. Gahiji's eyes. He flicked to the hand, then to Arun's face, then back again. Slowly, painfully slowly, Gahiji lowered his chin until it brushed the ground. A silverback's version of, "I acknowledge you." The young gorilla let out a trembling exhale, as if the whole mountain had been lifted from his small shoulders. Arun moved his other hand, bringing the cup close to Gahiji's lips. A warning rumble vibrated from the silverback's chest, not aggressive, but tense, primal. Aaron paused, letting the giant see the cup, smell it, understand it wasn't a weapon. Then the young gorilla placed his small hand on Gahiji's jaw. A soft touch, a reminder of why this mattered. Gahiji's lips parted, barely. Aaron took the chance. He guided the rim of the cup to the silverback's mouth and tilted it gently. The dark liquid slid between Gahiji's teeth. Some spilled, some dripped, but enough went in. Gahiji gagged at the bitterness, chest jerking. "It's okay," Aaron murmured, voice cracking. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." The young gorilla pressed closer, offering his own presence like a lifeline. Gahiji swallowed once, then again. The hardest part was over. Now came the part Aaron feared most, waiting to see if a miracle would happen. Seconds passed, then a minute, then another. Gahiji's breaths grew shallower, then suddenly deeper, as if his lungs were rediscovering themselves. Aaron dared to hope. Then Gahiji convulsed. His entire body shuddered violently, muscles seizing as the poison fought back. Foam spilled from his lips. His fingers clawed at the earth, gouging trenches in the mud. The young gorilla screamed, clinging to him. Aaron reached forward, but forced himself not to touch. This was the part where intervention could trigger panic, could cost lives, could ruin everything. He whispered, almost chanting, "Fight, fight, come on, big guy, fight." The convulsions intensified. Gahiji jerked, rolled slightly, gasping. The forest held its breath, bamboo trembling as if witnessing a ritual older than memory itself. And through it all, the young gorilla never moved away. He clung to Gahiji's massive arm, whimpering, pleading with every sound his throat could manage. Then, slowly, the tremors began to fade. Not stop, not vanish, but retreat. Retreat like a defeated enemy slipping back into the dark. Gahiji's chest shuddered with one final spasm, then expanded in a deep, rattling inhale. A survivor's inhale, the first sign that life had not let go. Aaron's eyes filled with tears he didn't expect. He didn't wipe them, he didn't speak, he just watched a miracle begin. For a brief and fragile moment, the world held still. Gahiji's body rested motionless, except for the faint, uneven rise of his chest. His breaths no longer came in frantic bursts, but in long, ragged pulls, as though each inhale was a negotiation between life and death. Arun didn't move. The young gorilla didn't breathe. The entire clearing seemed suspended on the edge of a single question. Would this be enough? Then the silence broke. Gahiji's body spasmed once, twice, and then convulsed, violently. The tremors struck like shockwaves, rippling through every limb. His massive frame thrashed with enough force to churn the mud beneath him. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth, thick and bitter, the poison still fighting for dominion inside him. The young gorilla screeched in terror, gripping the silverback's arm with both hands, trying to anchor him to the earth as if his own body could stop Gahiji from being dragged into the dark. Aaron's pulse hammered in his ears. He desperately wanted to reach out, to steady Gahiji's head or pull the younger one to safety, but he couldn't. Any sudden touch could trigger panic in a convulsing silverback, turning instinct into attack, even in a creature fighting for its life. So he stayed still, whispering into the storm, hold on, don't let go." The convulsions intensified. Gahiji's fingers dug trenches into the mud. His legs kicked, sending dirt flying. His breath stuttered into choking gasps. Then his entire torso arched upward in a painful, unnatural angle. And that's when Arun heard it, a crack of bamboo, then another, then an answer. Shapes emerged between the mist-draped stalks, large, silent, watching. The troop. Gahiji's family stepped into the clearing, surrounding the scene in a wide, trembling circle. Several females stood in front, their bodies tense and protective, eyes darting between the convulsing silverback and the human kneeling in the mud beside him. Two juveniles clung to their mothers, legs, eyes wide with fear. A subadult male stood at the back of the group, pounding his chest once, a low, threatening thud that carried a warning. One wrong move. Arun felt the signal like a blade pressed to his throat. He lowered his head slightly, keeping his hands open and low, not in surrender, but in respect. The young gorilla ran toward the troop with frantic urgency. He screeched, whined, made sharp rhythmic calls, his small hands waving in desperate explanation. At first, the troop didn't understand. Their growls deepened, their muscles bristled, their breaths came fast, but the young gorilla persisted. He approached a female, one of the elders, pressing both palms to her chest the same way he had done with Gahiji. The gesture was unmistakable. "He is helping, he saved him, don't attack." The elder froze. Her eyes shifted to Arun, then back to the young one. The tension in her shoulders eased, just barely, but the subadult male didn't relent. He stepped forward with a loud, guttural bark, stomping the ground hard enough to shake loose chips of stone. Arun forced himself not to flinch. His breath was shallow, his skin was cold, his heart felt suspended on a wire. And all at once, the convulsions stopped. Gahiji slumped heavily onto his side, releasing a long, rattling exhale that echoed through the clearing. The young gorilla scampered back, placing himself between the silverback and the troop again, chest puffed, trembling, but unyielding. The subadult paused. A deep, uncertain grunt left his chest. The elder female stepped forward, sniffed the air, and let out a series of soft, low calls, communication layered with nuance, understanding, hesitation, and, finally, acceptance. Arun exhaled shakily. Gahiji's breathing shifted again, no longer erratic, no longer gasping, deep, heavy, alive. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark, glassy eyes clouded with pain, but filled with awareness. He lifted one arm weakly. The troop fell silent. Arun froze, and then it happened. Gahiji tapped the ground once with his palm, a weak gesture, a small gesture, but among gorillas, a gesture that meant peace. "Stand down." The troop obeyed instantly. Their tension collapsed like mist, thinning under morning light. Shoulders lowered, growls faded. The subadult backed away a few steps, uncertain but no longer a threat. The young gorilla climbed onto Gahiji's side, pressing his head against the silverback's chest, releasing a long, quivering whimper of relief. Arun swallowed the lump in his throat. He'd seen miracles before, but none like this. The antidote had worked. Gahiji was still alive, but dawn was approaching, and with it, consequences larger than this clearing. Because saving Gahiji wasn't the end of this story. It was only the beginning. What had been tension, sharp enough to cut through fog, softened into something quieter, heavier, sacred. Dawn crept over the mountain ridge, washing the clearing with the faintest glow, a silver-blue light that made every drop of dew shine like a tear waiting to fall. Arun remained kneeling in the mud, his hands open at his sides, his breath slow and controlled. He didn't dare move. Not yet. Not until the troop told him it was safe to exist here. Gahiji lay still for a long moment, chest rising. In steady, deliberate breaths. No more spasms, no more choking gasps, only a slow rhythm, weak but unmistakably alive. The young gorilla curled against him, small fingers gripping big patches of fur, as if afraid the silverback might disappear if he let go. Arun felt emotion climb up his throat, raw and unexpected. He had seen gorillas fight. He had seen them mourn. He had even seen them hold each other, as if understanding grief more deeply than humans ever admitted. But this unity, this circle of devotion, this silent promise of we don't leave our own, was something words were too small to capture. Down in the mud, Gahiji moved. First a twitch in his fingers, then a flex in his forearm. Then, with monumental effort, he pressed his palm to the ground and slowly pushed his enormous body upward. The troop reacted instantly. Several juveniles skittered backward. 2 females stepped forward, ready to support him. The sub-adult male stiffened, unsure whether to help or stay back. But it was the young gorilla, the smallest among them, who braced himself at Gahiji's side, his trembling hand resting against the silverback's chest as if whispering, "Here, lean on me." Gahiji rose to a sitting position, shoulders sagging, breath rumbling in his chest like distant thunder. Even weakened, he radiated something impossible to describe, a mixture of authority, exhaustion, and gratitude. Then his eyes found Aaron. The world around them fell away. Fog blurred into a soft haze. Birdsong faded into silence. The cold earth beneath Arun's knees felt suddenly insignificant. Everything narrowed to the moment when the silverback and the human locked eyes. Arun didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't move. He held Gahiji's gaze with the quiet respect of someone who knew he was witnessing something that did not belong to science or research or any kind of human understanding. It belonged to something older. Gahiji lowered his head, not in weakness, not in defeat, but in a gesture, so intentional it stilled the breath in Arun's lungs. A gesture of acknowledgement, recognition, a silent pact of coexistence and trust. His massive palm slid across the earth until it rested near Arun's hand, close enough that their fingers nearly brushed through the thin layer of mud between them. It wasn't touch, it wasn't contact, but it was permission. The troop watched carefully. One by one, their postures softened, not relaxed, but open, as though seeing Arun not as an intruder in their world, but as the reason their world had not shattered tonight. A low, rumbling hum rose from one of the females, soft, melodic, almost mournful. It traveled across the clearing, vibrating through bamboo, through mud, through bone. Then another answered, and another, not grief, not fear, a chorus of recognition. The clearing vibrated with something ancient and powerful, a language older than words, older than humanity itself. And then, like mist lifting under the sun, it faded. The troop began to move. First, the juveniles, slipping quietly back into the bamboo-lined path, then the females, then the sub-adult, giving Arun one last evaluating stare before melting into the fog. Only Gahiji and the young gorilla remained. The silverback pushed himself unsteadily to his feet. His legs shook, his breath trembled, but he stood tall, alive, still the guardian of these mountains. The young gorilla looked back at Arun. Those eyes, full of fear, courage, hope, and trust, softened. He stepped closer and lifted his hand and touched Arun's forearm. Lightly, briefly, meaningfully, a thank you, a goodbye, a promise. Then he turned and followed his family into the trees. Gahiji lingered for a final moment. The fog curled around him like a cloak. The sun painted faint gold across his silver fur. He inhaled once, deep, exhaled, slow, then vanished behind the bamboo. Arun stayed where he was, kneeling in the mud, tears warming the cold morning air on his cheeks. He knew no report, no study, no scientific publication could ever describe what had happened here, because what he witnessed wasn't about data, it was about connection, courage, and something sacred the forest had chosen to share with him, and only him. He rose slowly, shoulders aching, and turned toward the path back to the station. As he walked, the fog parted just enough to reveal the rising light of dawn. And in that glow, he understood. Nature doesn't just speak. Sometimes, it chooses who gets to hear.